Grandma Moses, Laura Ingalls Wilder, Estelle Getty. What do they all have in common? They proved that achieving success has no age limit. It's never too late to start pursuing what you love, finding purpose, and making the most of your life. I'm your guest today, and I'm sharing some of my thoughts about continued learning, education, and teaching as a youthful older yogi. Let's stop saying I'm too old and start saying, let's get started. Welcome to the Youthful Older Yogi Podcast. I'm MJ Waddell, your yogi host and founder of Share Yoga. I've been practicing, teaching, and loving yoga for over 25 years. I'm an advocate of movement, creativity, and staying healthy in mind and body after 50. And so are my guests. It's never too late to start, and there's a lot of healthy years ahead. So let's start now. Hi, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Youthful Older Yogi. I'm MJ Waddell, creator and founder of Share Yoga, and your host of this podcast, the Youthful Older Yogi. My guest today is me. I have been going through hurricane season. I live down here in Florida, so I haven't been able to set up some guests due to some challenges with the hurricane. And so anyway, the guest today is me. And I thought what I'd talk about is the importance of continued training as you move into your later years. So for those of you that don't know me, my career, most of my life, my career has been on stage and musical theater. And I've done some big shows like Les Miserables and Mamma Mia, and I worked at Radio City Music Hall in the Christmas Spectacular for a number of years. And I basically worn the hat of actor, singer, dancer, choreographer, director, producer, backstage, everything that you can imagine in the theater world. I discovered yoga actually when I was on the national tour of Les Miserables back in 1996. At the time, I was 36, and this was my first musical as a singer, not a dancer. There's a little bit of dancing in that show, Les Miserables, but basically, this was my first experience in a national tour. I had done other small tours, and one of the cast members invited me to come to a yoga class. And I was feeling very burnt out at the gym, going to the gym as we were on tour. And I went and thought it was an easy little stretch class, and it turned into be a life-changing 90 minutes. I just walked out of that class with the sense of, well, something I had never sensed before. I felt completely balanced. I felt like I was in tune with my body, and I liked my body, and I felt like there was no struggle because as a dancer, I was, always struggling to maintain weight, maintain training. And I was at the time 36. So things started to shift, and I knew that I wouldn't be dancing professionally much longer. So anyway, and then on tour, I just started getting all these VHS, that's what they had back then, VHS tapes, and would do them in my hotel room. And whenever we would go to a different city, I would find the yoga studios. And at that time in the later 90s, yoga was starting to really boom. So I just fell in love with it. And I never really went back to the gym. I just practiced yoga, and I was just absorbing it and very hungry. So that led me to my first training. And my first training this is 10 years later, 2005. So I wrote down my timeline. Actually, no, 2006. So I'd been practicing for 10 years, never really thinking I wanted to teach it. But then I was like, gosh, I really want to share it with everybody else. And so when I was 46 is when I took my first teacher training class. And I took it with Yoga Works. Yoga Works is based out of LA and New York, but they started satellite programs. So, and at that time, it was in Washington, D.C. I lived in Annapolis, Maryland at the time. And I traveled into Washington, D.C., and my 200 hours I did in 1 month. So it was 5 or 6 days a week, 8 hours a day. I was not prepared for that. I would recommend anyone that trains their 200-hour, they do it over a longer period of time so you can absorb what you're learning. But I did it, and you had to write papers every night and practice teach, and it was intense, really intense. But I was also opened up to not just the poses, the asanas, but everything else that yoga encompassed, which I was kind of a little bit familiar with, but nothing like this. So 2006, I got through the 200 hours, and my teacher, his name was James Brown, and amazing teacher. If you're listening, James, you really did set my foundation to continue to love yoga and to want to teach. He was amazing. And then I just continued to study. And in 2009, I did my 300 hours to get my 500 hours total training. And I did that with Jenny Otto and Lynn Matthews at Golden Heart Yoga in Annapolis, Maryland. Some of these places where I trained, they're no longer in existence, but and that was Anusara based, and there was a lot more philosophy. They had some guests come in, Anna Dea Judith, who wrote Eastern Body, Western Mind. Rod Stryker came in, another really incredible yoga teacher, especially in meditation as well. And I finally started teaching in 2010. So if you are just practicing yoga, you're never really quite sure where your yoga journey would take you. So I did start teaching right after my 200 hours, 2006, but I've been practicing for 10 years. So from there, I just continued to teach wherever I was. I remember I was teaching the companies that I was working in. So I was in the national tour of Mamma Mia, and I would teach whoever wanted to come and take a class. We'd find a space and I'd teach there, which was really fun. And I would just take it all these different studios across the country, which that is learning. That is so much learning. You learn what you like, what you don't like. Maybe you're introduced to something unfamiliar. And this episode is more like a thank you to all of my teachers. And maybe I've only taken one class with you, and you may have said one thing that stuck with me. It might have been up in Canada. It might have been over on the West Coast, the Midwest, the East Coast. All over the country, I've been able to take classes because I was in 2 national tours. So I was very, very fortunate that way.
I wanted to pop in to thank you for listening to The Youthful Older Yogi. It's season 2, and I'm so excited to bring you more great guests, education, and ways for you to stay youthful in mind and body after 50. If you love the show and want to help me make it even better, please consider becoming a supporter. You get to choose how much and how often you give, and there's no commitment. And remember, I donate a portion of every dollar I receive to charity. For 2024, I've chosen UNICEF. Just click the support button in the show notes. And just as helpful is sharing the show with other youthful older yogis. Thank you again so much for listening. And now let's get back to the podcast.
And I continued my training in 2010. I took a yin yoga training in Asheville, North Carolina, which Asheville Yoga Center, amazing. One of my favorite yoga centers. I think that was a 2 or 3 day training. 2011, in 2010, I had to make a move. I went through a divorce, had to move back home into Rochester, New York, and I started teaching there. And it was a Baptiste-inspired studio, and I had to complete the Baptiste training. So I did that in 2011. In 2013, I continued with Art of Assisting, and I was still there up in Rochester. I also took another wonderful course by Dr. Timothy McCall called Yoga as Medicine. I will try to put in all the links. There's so many people. Timothy McCall, you can Google him, Dr. Timothy McCall. He also has a book out, Yoga as Medicine. He was actually a doctor, maybe a surgeon, I want to say, but also practiced yoga. So he's got this great balance of both. And then in 2014, I also started Share Yoga. So Share Yoga, I started because I wanted to share yoga, obviously. And it started out as a fundraiser, and it still is. It's still going. And I would do fundraising events for local charities. So it could have been for the Girl Scouts. It could have been for a bridal party. It could be for, a retirement party. So we do a little bit of, sometimes I wouldn't even call it yoga. We do a little bit of stretching and moving and have some fun. And people would pay a certain amount, and a certain amount of that would go towards their charity. So if they wanted to highlight a charity, they could invite their friends, and really it was about teaching awareness of that charity and giving to the charity and doing a little bit of movement and yoga, and introducing them. And today Share Yoga is now, I still do it online. I still donate a portion of every dollar that I make. A portion of that is donated to a charity. Last year it was World Central Kitchen, and this year I'm donating to UNICEF. I did one in-person party. Everything's different after COVID. So I'm trying to get back into in-person parties again because it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. Then I took in 2017, I think this was my first online training. I took in 2017 Yoga for All with Diane Bondi and Amber Carnes. Again, this is, I believe Diane Bondi is still offering this training. Really, really important. People in bigger bodies, people that might not have as much accessibility to yoga. It's a fantastic program. Recommend it highly. And 2019, I moved to Florida, and I thought, okay, I'm going to get certified in silver sneakers with yoga, which I did. But it turned out to be, I've let that lapse because it turned out to be, it's very, it just doesn't pay enough, basically. That's what I want to say about it. It doesn't pay enough. And then this year, I'm studying with Jason Crandall. It's injury prevention and a better way to teach flow. It's a fantastic program. I'm about 75% through it. It's also online, but he also offers monthly in-person Zoom calls where we can ask any questions about anything yoga related. It's wonderful. JasonCrandall.com. Jason's been around for a few decades, very knowledgeable about anatomy, which I love. And I also, this past year, got certified in aqua yoga with Krista Fairbrother, who is in the Tampa area over in Florida. And she's been teaching aqua yoga for people with arthritis or any chronic illness that they just can't do land yoga. So the water is a beautiful place to do that. She offers online trainings as well. Completely recommend her. So this episode is just to say I'll be 65 in January, and I continue my training and I continue my practice. It has completely evolved. My practice is not the hot power, sweat your ass off yoga that it started out to be, which I'm very grateful for. But also years and years of dancing, teaching aerobics. Oh yeah, I taught aerobics before I did yoga. And wear and tear of my body it's showing up. I'm not complaining about it. I'm so grateful, and I really honor my body and all that it's done for me. But the training continues. So I want to encourage anyone that's starting out, older. Like I didn't start teaching until I was, in my 40s. I was 46 when I started teaching. And it's never too late to take a training. There's so many different types of trainings that you can take. It doesn't have to be in asana. It could be in meditation. It could be in yin. It could be in so many different vast subjects of yoga. And it's another reason I started the podcast. I wanted to encourage youthful older yogis to continue and know that your practice will evolve, you'll evolve and become a better teacher and a better practitioner. And the wisdom that you impart, you can take that into your classes. I remember how it was to be younger and just wanting to sweat and be challenged and all that. And now I'm knowing now at this age, I still want that some days. Other days, I really am in tune with my body and I know I need to rest it and do a slower practice or a meditative practice or a yin practice or just study, So I want to encourage you older yogis to keep going, to keep studying, and not to feel like you couldn't go in and teach a power class or a more energetic class. I can go in and teach it. I just can't demonstrate it anymore. But I can teach it, but not demonstrate it. Because that's what I used to do all the time. I could do a lot of advanced poses. And now those advanced poses, they're put on the shelf. And they were really useful at the time, but they're not anymore. But there are other poses that are useful, and there's ways to teach those advanced poses, which I encourage you older yogis to do. If you can't do the pose, it doesn't mean you can't teach it if you've done the pose before. My one rule is if I've never been able to do the pose, what they call the full expression of the pose, which I don't like that term, but the pose that you see a picture of, I teach the actions to get there. And I may not, be able to demonstrate it or teach it all the way up. And also I know now who exactly is able to handle those poses. Most people will never be able to do the poses, the advanced poses that you see with their leg behind their head or, extreme physical poses that you may see at Cirque du Soleil. And that's a good thing to know and to learn. But you can teach actions leading up to poses. And also, I know now that the poses don't dictate whether you're good or bad at yoga. Showing up dictates how you are with yoga. Just show up. Just show up, sit on your mat and breathe, or sit on your chair and breathe, or sit outside and breathe. I say, if you can breathe, you can do yoga. So I just wanted to tell you that it's never too late to take a teacher training, do your research. I'm going to share some links, but do your research because not all teachers are for you. And it's really important that you spend your money wisely because it's not cheap to do yoga trainings. It's an expense. And I also want to say that what I love about where I am now at this point in my yoga journey is that I really, really enjoy teaching. I did teach full time for about 5 years when I was up in Rochester, and I got burnt out. I was in my 50s then, and it was a survival. I had to, but I got burnt out, and then my practice suffered. So a lot of yoga teachers, when you start out, you don't even have your own personal practice. You go to class, which is great. You go to the same teacher, which is great, or you go to the same thing. But eventually it will shift. And hopefully you'll find your personal practice evolves. I love my personal practice. One thing that I've done less of is go out to studios and take random classes. And the reason for that is because I enjoy my personal practice so much that I don't need to do that. And I'm studying and learning other things from different teachers through studying. And my point is that keep studying, keep practicing, and keep evolving, and know that just because you may be older doesn't mean you need to stop teaching yoga or practicing yoga. It just needs to, you need to to change it up a little bit that suits your body and whatever season of life you're in. Now, I want to talk about this podcast. How this podcast came to be was, of course, pre-COVID, I was teaching, and here in Florida, I was teaching at a studio. Since then, that studio has been through two name changes and owners. And I just did teach a 6-week beginner class earlier this year there. And I also taught a workshop, a Yoga Alliance approved workshop for teachers there back in January. So the in-person thing is starting to come back. But what I've learned for myself is I don't want to teach full time. I teach once a week at a 55 and over community. And in the summer, I was teaching pool classes 2 a week. But that was just 3 classes a week, very non-stressful, not having to come up with, class after class after class. So now that's why I love my personal practice. And I don't have to teach full time. For those of you teaching full time, I admire you if you're teaching in person. So I started this podcast last year, 2023, as an experiment. It was a 3 Zoom experiment because I'm trying to have an online business, which is harder than I ever thought it would be. When people say, just start an online business, I don't really like the word easy because nothing's easy unless you know how to do it. So I've been pretty consistent with this podcast every 2 weeks. It's not consistent this week due to the hurricanes. And there's no pressure. That's my own dedicated decision that I wanted to do 2 a month. And I've been doing that since May of 2023. So, and I love it. I love the guests I've had on. I appreciate if you're listening. But I also did this because I wanted to start an online business. And it has been really, really difficult for me. I'm a one-woman show. And the hardest part is the technology, learning everything you need to know, learning my website. I'm still very challenged with the website that I've chosen, even though I tune into all their webinars and this and that, but it's all tutorials. So I say that I go to the University of Self-Taught Technology every day. I'm going to that university. And really, it's watching tutorial after tutorial, taking notes, and then maybe figuring out one step closer of how I can get to do X or whatever my goal is. And I think that's why a lot of people, older people or people past 50, they want to start something online, but it's just too overwhelming. Yes, it is. And it's still overwhelming for me. But I'm very proud of myself. I just created a 4-week or 4-session meditation series, which I just completed the 2nd week. But it took me, I'm going to say about 3 months. I already had taught the program. It wasn't about creating the program. I had done this in person. It was about learning how to put it on my website, learning how to get an email list, learning how to send out information to certain people. It's still mind-boggling. I'm not going to ever say it's easy, and I'm still learning. Even doing this, I'm just doing it off the cuff. This is the first time I haven't had a script. I've always had a guest, and I know what I'm going to ask them and figuring that out. And then I do have an editor. That's the one person that has helped me. I had an editor to start out with, Andrea Canny, who also helped me with the initial Zoom experiment. And then she helped me get in and make it into a podcast. Couldn't have done it without her help. And now I have a different editor. She's in Ohio, and she still helps me. I still can text her and say, okay, I've exhausted, I've watched every tutorial. Now what? And usually it's just like, here. And she's very, very considerate. And she doesn't say, oh, it's really easy, because she knows my head will explode when you say that. But learning this, it's still an ongoing process, and it always will be. So I'm not a person to give up, and I enjoy connecting with people, and I enjoy sharing yoga. So I appreciate you listening, and I appreciate any feedback or comments. I'm not even sure how you would comment on the podcast, except maybe send me an email or look at the show notes, if you know how to look at the show notes. When I told my father that I had a podcast, he's like, "What's a podcast?" Right? So, and I understand. But if you're listening, I appreciate it. If maybe you've been a guest and you've shared my podcast, thank you so much. I try not to be too intrusive with emails and things like that. I also I write blogs. And so if you're on Facebook, you can find me at MaryJayne Waddell on Facebook. And Jane is spelled with a Y, Jayne. I'm on Instagram, but I don't do much with that. I might post a soundbite because that's the only thing I've learned how to do. So I'm trying not to overwhelm myself. But I would love it if you go to my website, shareyogawithmj.com, shareyogawithmj.com, and just subscribe to my email list. When you subscribe, you'll get a free audio meditation from me. And I send out emails. You can unsubscribe at any time, and with things that I'm offering, or just random, hello, and share the podcast as well. Thank you very much for this listening. If you're listening, today is October 13th, 2024, and we just got through Hurricane Milton and Helene. And so I want to send out, I never know the right words to say. There are no words to say to people that are going through devastation and loss of property or life or hope. So I'm just very, very grateful that we're past that hurricane. But I know for many of you, there's no gratitude right now. So thank you again for listening, and keep sharing yoga. Take care.
Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate your comments, all likes, and all shares. Please subscribe to my website, shareyogawithmj.com, so you can receive my newsletter and be first to take advantage of my courses and freebies. If you navigate on social media, you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at MaryJayne Waddell. That's Jane with a Y, Jayne. This podcast would not be possible without the help of my editor, Dan Jones, from Cocoa Beach Productions. You can find Dan at cocoabeachweb.com. And of course, thanks to my generous guests who share their time, insights, and youthful wisdom. Remember, the Youthful Older Yogi podcast is presented solely for educational, inspirational, and entertainment purposes. It is not intended as a substitute for a physician or other qualified professionals. Okay, yogis, stay well, stay youthful, and keep sharing yoga.